there were 11.8 million millionaires in the United States as of 2019. Now, whether this should apply to people with total assets over a million or to only people with liquid assets in excess of a million, the definition remains contested among members of high society. But overall, we are looking at 11.8 million people, right? Or 11.8 million people or married couples that have at least $1 million in net worth. And so this brings up the idea of, okay, well then what's net worth, right? We've talked previously about net worth, but let's rehash a bit exactly what it means when we say net worth. Well, your net worth, right, is the net amount that you and the assets that you own are worth after you pay off all of your liabilities. And so this means that what you own minus what you owe, okay? Or your assets minus liabilities. For those of you who have any type of accounting background, this is very similar to the accounting equation where you say assets minus liabilities is equal to shareholders' equity. Well, in the same way, assets minus liabilities from a personal standpoint is going to be equal to your net worth. And so if you have $1 million in assets, but you have $500,000 in liabilities, then you aren't technically a millionaire because your net worth does not exceed $1 million. Your net amount that you are worth is in that case only $500,000, is only $500,000. Not only this particular issue, there's also the issue that I alluded to a moment ago where people think that it needs to be your liquid assets. And when we say liquid assets, these are assets that are easily turned into cash. These are assets that are easily sold and turned into cash. And so this means that you have stocks, you have cash, you have different types of investment accounts that are equal to $1 million. Not you have a personal residence, because your personal residence does count towards your net worth. Your personal residence, if you have any equity in it, counts towards your net worth. Well, they're saying, okay, not that, just your liquid assets, just the things that can be easily turned into cash, like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, investment accounts, anything like that, any cash that you may have, your bank accounts, all those types of things. But overall, what we are going to call a millionaire is somebody who has just a net worth over $1 million, a net worth of at or more than $1 million, including your personal residence, including some of the more illiquid things that you may run across, not just the liquid assets, okay? So hopefully this clears it up just a bit for you. Now, how does it work being a millionaire? Like, what does this look like? Well, when considering whether someone is a millionaire, you typically have to consider, obviously, their net worth. And this is, like I said, your assets minus your liabilities. Well, this is a hypothetical summary of the total financial value of a person's balance sheet. So when I said, if you have some knowledge of accounting, the accounting equation, well, that accounting equation comes from the balance sheet in accounting. And the balance sheet in accounting gives you the idea of what a company owns and what they owe at any given point in time. And the same is true for a person. If you made a balance sheet for an individual, you could see what that individual is worth at any point in time. Okay, so this takes into account the appraised value of all non-liquid assets along with the true market value of liquid assets that you own. The concept is meant to be representative of a person's assets minus their liabilities, or simply what they own minus what they owe, right? This is the concept of net worth. Now, categorizing millionaires in this way is not cut and dry when factoring in non-liquid assets. As the price of consumer goods rises and falls, and in an economic slump, it's unrealistic for assets to fetch full price in the market. And not only is it unrealistic for assets to fetch full price, sometimes it's unrealistic that you can even sell some of the illiquid assets that you may own. So counting illiquid assets becomes a little more difficult. Not to mention, you don't know what price you could sell your home for today. You may have a general idea, but unless you want to have it appraised and have a realtor come and look, and you want to do all these different things that are really unnecessary if you're just going to stay living in the house that you currently live in, then there's really no reason to go through all of that hassle just to determine what your net worth is. And so it's not cut and dry, it's not perfect, but you can get a good idea of what your net worth is just based on the general value of whatever you own, liquid or illiquid. Now, when considering whether a person is a millionaire, it's often the case that you look at the individual's balance sheet, like I said a moment ago, and this will help you to see if he or she is worth at least $1 million after considering their wealth and their debts. And so your debts are a big part of whether or not you are a millionaire, because the more debts that you have, even if they're being used to purchase assets, we don't just count the assets. Like I've seen people online many times talk about being real estate billionaires, right? Well, you may, have this empire of billions of dollars in rental real estate, right? There may be billions of dollars of assets, but there's also hundreds of millions in liabilities. Okay, so just because you have these billions of dollars in assets does not mean that you are a billionaire. You're not a billionaire unless you have $1 billion of net worth, okay? And net worth takes out the liabilities associated with whatever assets you own. So in the same way that is true, if you, let's say, went out, and I know this is a huge example, but let's just use this for simplicity's sake. If you went out and you bought an apartment complex or building that cost $1 million, right? Let's say you went and bought, or maybe a commercial property that cost $1 million, and that was all that you had, right? All you had was that commercial asset. Well, if you bought that with cash, then you would have a $1 million net worth. Okay, you would be a millionaire. But if you didn't put any cash towards it, which again is not realistic, but if you didn't put any cash towards it and you just finance the $1 million commercial property, and so you owe $1 million towards this property, even though you're going to be able to collect rents on it, it is still a liability of $1 million, even though the asset's worth $1 million. So your net worth still works out to zero. Okay. And then as you build equity in it, as you make payments, then your net worth in that particular asset will increase. But you can see that your debts play a huge part in keeping you from becoming a millionaire and keeping you from that point where your net worth does hit $1 million or greater. So I think it'd be interesting just for a moment to look at a little history, right? Where does this word millionaire come from? Well, the word millionaire, it brings up these ideas of these celebrities and athletes and people of interest, these businessmen and businesswomen who have done so great in their respective fields, who have made millions of dollars. That's who we think of. But this is originally a French term used to describe the men made rich off of speculative investments in the New World. By the standards of the 18th century, a millionaire was someone who had amassed an unimaginable amount of money. So there was no specific definition to it as there is today. But at the time, it was like, a millionaire is somebody who has so much money you can't even count it. Like it's a crazy amount of money. Now, through global warfare, credit catastrophes, and dramatic concentration of wealth among a small percentage of people, the 20th century propelled mankind's contemporary obsession with the consumer comforts and luxury brands enjoyed by the rich and famous. And so in the wake of 120 years of inflation, $1 million hasn't retained the exceptional buying power that it had back in 1900, which would be the equivalent to about 31 million in 2019 dollars, right? So what we're seeing here is that the value of the dollar has declined substantially over the years. $1 million is not worth what $1 million was once worth, right? $1 million is worth far less than it was 120 years ago. It's a very different world than it was back then. And so this idea of being a millionaire is naturally going to be more common, right? Because if it's just based on an amount of net worth, and the dollar has been devalued since that point, well, then naturally it's going to be easier to amass that amount of wealth, that amount of money over the course of that 120-year period than it was way back when.